Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So as she shared, so I'm a social worker, and the session will be on topic of grief before the loss. So just before we get started, we'd like to share a disclaimer for our presentation. This presentation is to provide you with information on what ambiguous loss is to gain an understanding. Not all coping strategies discussed may work for you. It is important to seek out your own coping strategies that can work for you. This session is not structured to cure you of your grief, but rather for care partners to find meaning in their journey, not closure. And also, just as if you would like more support, to speak with Alzheimer's Society staff through our client support team.
So this afternoon's sessions from Craig on Tender Truths around intimacy and Justine's presentation on finding meaning has really blended beautifully into our topic for today. And I want to take a moment to recognize that parts of each session touched upon the experience of ambiguous loss, its complexity and uncertainty that surfaces. And within our presentation, we do hope to provide further information and additional support. So our objectives for today is going to be defining the types of grief. What is ambiguous loss? The difference between primary and secondary losses, how grief manifests within us, the 7 guidelines for coping with ambiguous loss, and then we'll wrap up with coping strategies and ways to find help.
Yeah, so to start, it's important to discuss some of the definitions of grief and loss to create a foundation of knowledge for what we'll be discussing today. So, loss is the severing from someone or something who we've held great attachment. Grief, grief is the experience of coping with loss. It is our whole being's involuntary response to the loss, not always the death. Anticipatory grief, the process of mourning and experiencing emotions associated with the loss before the actual event happens. Disenfranchised grief, also known as a hidden grief or sorrow, refers to any grief that is not acknowledged, validated, or socially accepted in today's society. This kind of grief is often minimized or not understood by others, which makes it particularly hard to process and work through. For example, with dementia, there is something definitely lost. It is felt, but the response to that feeling can be different. People may not come to you and offer support, such as when the person has passed away. And you may hear statements such as, you're lucky to still have them. But that doesn't really reflect how you actually feel right now and often can invalidate the grief that you are experiencing today.
So the term we're mainly going to be focusing on today is called ambiguous loss. So this term was coined by Pauline Boss to put a name to a very unique kind of loss, a loss that is unclear, it has no resolution or no closure. So there's 2 types of ambiguous loss. The first is physical loss, and this is where someone may be physically absent and psychologically present, such as a missing person, a divorce, someone deployed in the military. So when thinking about a divorce, for example, your ex-partner is still physically present in the world, but they may no longer be a part of your life as they once were when you were married. You may not see each other anymore, you may not speak to each other, and yet this person is still here, and your life now has completely changed. Another example is the idea of gone but not for sure. And this is when a missing person is physically absent, and yet families may psychologically remember this person due to the possibility of that person maybe coming back. There remains an uncertainty not knowing if this person may return home, and often families do go through life with this unknown. The second is psychological loss. So, this is the experience where someone is physically present, yet may not be mentally or emotionally present in the same way as before. So, that includes dementia, addiction, chronic mental illness. So, we will be focusing on that latter, that psychological loss. And dementia is a prime example of that ambiguous loss. Making sense of it is especially difficult because someone is simultaneously here and gone. The person you're caring for is still living, whether it be with you in the same home environment or another home environment, and they may even physically look the same. However, the person that once was able to complete certain tasks around the house, engage in conversation, help out with the grandchildren, be emotionally supportive is changing and becoming absent in those areas as they progress with their dementia.
So, ambiguous loss complicates grief. It's often hard to recognize this grief or know how to grieve when the ability of the person with dementia has changed. This is very different from the loss and grief of a sudden death, for example, where you clearly know that person has gone. When there is a death, it is common to get support from family and friends, which may aid in the natural process of grieving. Rather, ambiguous loss lacks clear resolution or the idea of closure, such as a death, which complicates the grief. These losses are not sudden. The loss occurs gradually and continuously throughout the journey, and it is hard to identify the beginning or the end of a loss. Caregivers are often grappling with the notion of a person with dementia physically being here, but cognitively changing in a way that changes the person that they once knew. Caregivers may feel confused on how to grieve that person while they're actually still here. And society and tradition often have helped us aid us in how to grieve after death, like mourning rituals, funerals, memorials of life, but not when a person is declining cognitively and physically due to a medical condition.
So within the grief experience, there is a primary loss, which is the initial event, such as a death, a divorce, or a diagnosis of dementia. As a result of that primary loss comes secondary losses, which are the losses experienced as a result of that primary loss. These losses may be very obvious or they may go unacknowledged. With ambiguous loss, these losses tend to be unclear. There may be uncertainty if it's a temporary loss or a permanent loss as the person with dementia fluctuates through their journey. Losses and grieving are experienced across the entire journey of dementia for the caregiver and for the person living with dementia as their own abilities change. There's a loss of mutual dreams and plans for the future in spousal relationships and shifting dynamics within the relationship where shared responsibility begins falling solely on the caregiver. Losses are experienced in different areas from physical losses, psychological losses, environmental, social, and relationship. So I'm just going to kind of go through the bubbles there on the screen. I'm going to start with psychological just to show some examples of what some of the secondary losses caregivers and people living with dementia might be experiencing. So with the psychological loss, caregivers might start to experience behavioral changes. So a person who was once very nice now might be experiencing behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia, becoming maybe agitated or verbally aggressive. Caregivers might shift their confidence, feeling maybe less confident in their ability to manage caregiving tasks. Caregivers can lose a sense of self and their identity as their identity starts to shift into one that's more of a caregiver. Caregivers might feel a loss of sense of control, loss of emotional availability, and people living with dementia might experience that loss of empathy, right? With that frontal lobe, losing that ability to empathize with others. And caregivers might also experience decision fatigue, becoming that sole caregiver and that sole decision maker. A lot more decisions are being placed on your shoulder. As for physical losses might be changing, right? Needing more assistance at home, having mobility changes, having to get more changes to the home environment as those changes happen, and the caregiver might experience lower energy levels. Relationship losses may be that the household responsibilities are now being shouldered by one person. Managing finances, maybe it was something that you never did in the past, and now you are learning how to do that. Um, Oftentimes, adult children tend to feel like such a role reversal where they are now caring for a parent and parenting a parent. Or a spouse may not feel like a parent, not feel like a spouse anymore. Other relationship changes include the loss of intimacy, that physical connection, as well as that loss of recognition, where the person with dementia may not be able to recognize who you are anymore. Other losses include loss of friends, having to withdraw because of the care needs, or not being able to get out and leave the person with dementia home alone, loss of outings, and loss of shared activities. Maybe you used to go golfing together, but because of the physical abilities of the person with dementia, those are changing and you're not able to engage in those things the same way. And finally, for environmental, those losses might be financial strain. A dual income household might now be a single income household, or now you have to pay for long-term care on top of, having a fixed pension. Environmental changes include, moving to a long-term care home or a retirement home, and that shift where you used to, live together for the past 60 years, and now you're living in separate homes. Um, Daily routine changes, healthcare providers entering the home, accessibility changes, those modifications due to physical changes. Maybe you're now sleeping in a different bedroom to get better sleep because the person with dementia often gets up frequently throughout the night. And a huge one is a loss of driver's license, where now caregivers become the sole driver or have to find alternative ways to get around.
Yeah, so in terms of how some of those from those secondary losses and just experiencing grief, grief is not a feeling. Grief has numerous emotions. However, the experience as a whole is so much bigger and all encompassing than a single emotion. Grief manifests itself physically, cognitively, behaviorally, emotionally, and spiritually. As we see in this slide here, like some of these things, when we look at the physical, how it can create the sleep disturbances, body aches, fatigue, loss of appetite. When we look cognitively, a lot of caregivers might say to me, like, I feel like I'm getting confused. I'm having trouble with some of my memory, completing tasks, behavioral, some of that social withdrawal, maybe not wanting to reach out to those friends around you or withdrawing from activities that you really enjoyed. Emotional, feeling a lot of those waves of emotions when it comes to sadness, depression, some of those hopelessness, fear, anger, resentment, all those kinds of things that can happen. And kind of what Justine may have touched on as well, that spiritual aspect, how grief can manifest itself through a spiritual aspect, questioning why, that inner turmoil when it comes to your faith, and questioning possibly a higher power. I know if you are experiencing any of these symptoms, it is important to recognize that these are normal things that happen when you are grieving. If you do actually feel like you have concerns on how it's affecting your daily life, quality of life, you may benefit from seeking support or finding ways to alleviate some of these symptoms. This might be looking like family doctor, seeking counseling, connection with other peers, support groups, coming to the Alzheimer Society, getting connected. And we'll be sharing with you some ways that you can cope through this ambiguous loss today.
So this section, we're going to be discussing the 7 guidelines to help cope with ambiguous loss that were identified in Pauline's boss, her book called Loving Someone Who Has Dementia. So guideline 1 is finding meaning. And so when caring for someone with dementia, trying to find meaning can be challenging due to the ambiguous nature of the diagnosis. Meaning is often ruptured, increasing caregivers' feelings of helplessness and hopelessness. Thinking more openly requires us to focus on the meaning of our relationship with the person living with dementia rather than on what is normal. Often we do have to change our idea of what relationship previously existed and making sense of this new relationship that does exist. To find meaning in a confusing situation, it can be helpful by starting off with naming the problem, calling it as it is, ambiguous loss. It may also be helpful in naming the losses that you're experiencing, so referring back to those secondary losses we discussed earlier. Most importantly, to find meaning, caregivers can they learn to accept 2 ideas simultaneously using paradoxical thinking, which is that both and thinking. Shifting away from absolute thinking that someone with dementia is either here or gone, can caregivers shift their thinking to one where the person with dementia is both present and absent?
Mm.
Some examples for both and thinking that may help find meaning are I'm both the person with dementia's daughter, son, spouse, and their caregiver. I both love the person with dementia exactly as they are now and miss how they used to be. I am both sad that the person with dementia shows their love and appreciation for me now, which was different from the past, and I'm grateful to have this time together. Some caregivers did not get a choice when becoming a caregiver, especially if the caregiver did not have a good relationship with the person in the past. Caregivers who did not have a great relationship and are now caring for someone who has changed as a result of the dementia to maybe a nicer person may complicate their grief around grieving what could have been or how to make sense of that relationship now. Caregivers may also find meaning through the language that helps them make sense of their experience, or finding meaning through poetry, music, religion, spirituality. In addition, caregivers have also found meaning in doing the job of a caregiver by managing the tasks of daily life, personal care, managing appointments and medications. And others have been able to find meaning by finding a community of other caregivers by joining a support group or a peer connection who they get it.
When we look at guideline number two, balance control with acceptance, we live in a society that values mastery, certainty, and problem solving. As humans, beings, it is our nature to want to have control. And when caring for someone with dementia, we're often taught that if we try hard enough or do the right things, we can fix what is right in front of us. However, in the situation with dementia, where we have no control over the pace of the progression or the changes that we see, this mindset can actually potentially leave us feeling powerless and blaming ourselves. We often cannot control what is happening around us. We can shift our control inward. We have to look inwards when we need to, knowing that we can't control that. We can work towards mastering our thoughts, our reactions, our internal world. Practices like prayer, meditation, music, movement, or exercise can help us feel grounded and give us some moments of calm and meaning. A key step is learning to clearly differentiate between what we can control and what we can't. This helps us to redirect our energy wisely rather than depleting ourselves and trying to change the unchangeable. As you can see in the slide here, using a circle of control diagram, it can help differentiate what is within our control and what's out of our control. And this is something that a lot of our counselors use to support people to know, especially what is within us and what's without us. Our sense of our intense societal and personal need for closure makes loving someone with dementia often an uphill battle at times. When someone you love has dementia, the challenge is to balance mastery and control with this piece of acceptance. Finally, this guidelines invite us to embrace ambiguity. Life is not fair, as we know, and difficult circumstances are not a personal failure. So we have to see it as we live each day well, knowing that things not always will go our way, and bad things often do sometimes happen to good people. Letting go and especially that self-blame can be an act of acceptance, self-compassion, and a part of the healing that comes along in the dementia journey as a caregiver who's supporting them.
So the third guideline is broadening your identity. So before becoming a caregiver, each of you started off as a partner, spouse, adult child, grandchild, niece, nephew, sibling, aunt or uncle, or even a friend. Who are you now that you're caring for someone with dementia? Now that you've stepped into this caregiver role, often the role of caregiving becomes the sole identity. You're constantly managing tasks, scheduling appointments, being a chauffeur, spending time engaging with the person with dementia, being an advocate with healthcare providers, and even helping with personal care tasks. The increased load of responsibility often absorbs much of an individual's identity. With the progression of dementia, caregivers can experience a loss of recognition where the person with dementia may not know who the caregiver is anymore. The presence of dementia can confuse identity. For example, the husband whose wife no longer knows him wonders if he's still married. He doesn't feel that he is. Or the daughter of a mother with dementia wonders if she's still a daughter or is she not her mother's parent. So how do you broaden your identity to fit the ambiguity? In broadening your identity, it may be helpful to utilize that paradoxical thinking where an adult child may be both a child to a parent and a parent to a parent, or a spouse may both feel married and not married to their spouse. Caregivers may need to reconstruct the roles that they play. Roles that once were the person with dementia now becomes your role, such as a cook, the financial manager, or even the handyman. With reconstructing these roles, it may be helpful to ask who is allowed to do these roles. Can these roles be shared by others, asking other family members to help with the certain roles so you don't have to bear the responsibilities on your own? In many situations, though, this is not a reality. Caregivers often do shoulder a lot of the responsibility as other family members do not step up and help. And this can really make it harder on the caregiver. The most important part in broadening your identity is reflecting on how you see yourself now. Besides being a caregiver, who are you? It's important that caregivers focus on who they are outside of caregiving and engage in those identities to help lower stress. It can feel selfish to engage in those parts, but for caregivers, it's important you do not lose who you are in the process. Try and discover your choice and make decisions about how to find some continuity in the midst of chaos and change.
Guideline number 4. So managing your mixed emotions. Loss often brings mixed emotions, and this can be confusing and unsettling. It's common to feel many emotions at once, including anger, sadness, and guilt all in one moment. For example, a care partner might feel frustrated or angry during a difficult interaction and then immediately feel guilty for having that reaction. This emotional back and forth is very common within grief. These emotions are normal. Feelings, anger, or guilt does not mean that you are doing something wrong or that you don't care. What matters is recognizing the difference between having these emotions and acting on them. Emotions themselves are not harmful. How we respond to them is where choice and care and thought comes in. One of the most important coping strategies is not carrying these feelings alone. Talking with others, whether it be in a care partner support group or other peers, professionals, they can help normalize the experience of having these mixed emotions. When mixed emotions are named, shared, they often become more manageable. And this is not about fixing the loss, but about finding support, understanding, and compassion as you move through some of those emotions.
Guideline 5 is hold on and let go. As dementia progresses, your relationship with the person with dementia is now more one-sided. Caregivers may find it helpful to embrace the ambiguity of their relationship by using that paradoxical thinking to one where the person with dementia is both here and gone. Instead of focusing solely on the past relationship and wanting the relationship to still exist, caregivers may find comfort in focusing on the middle ground, a less than perfect relationship. Rather than closing this person off completely, as if this person has already died, can caregivers settle for a partial relationship, one where you still engage, visit, and care for the person with dementia? For example, a caregiver may let go of their mother being the one that they could confide in for advice or validation, and now spends their visits sharing with their mother about their life with the acceptance that she cannot provide that advice. It's not the person's fault. They're not giving you a hard time. They're having a hard time. And the dementia has caused this relationship change. Caregivers may find ease in grieving what has been lost and celebrating what still remains, such as their ability to laugh, smile, listen to music, hold hands, and still be independent in certain tasks. To help support in the loss of relationship, caregivers find value in seeking connections with others to foster what is missing. This may be done by engaging in a support group, talking with peers, or spending time with family. Fostering connections with others will not replace what value of the relationship you once had with the individual you're caring for, but can help balance what has been lost.
And guideline 6, imagine new hopes and dreams. What does your future look like? What do you envision? Being a caregiver creates some barriers to do everything you want to do or how you would envision your life. However, Just as we spoke in broadening your identity, it's important to take the opportunities to connect, grow, and seek out things you enjoy. An example is someone may have always wanted to learn piano, and instead of saying, I can't do this because of my caregiving role, you can start off slow. Maybe learning something off of a YouTube video, then maybe being able to go to a class or two. Let's try seeing it as a process than rather having to trying it to be a specific destination by a specific time. When we imagine and can accept ambiguity for what is happening today, it provides hope for the future and for what your life can look like today. Hope lies in your perception and your ability to change. Seeing yourself and your situation in a new light can often open doors. Looking at what you've gained through this journey. I know a lot of times in my support groups, we talked about the gains and the gaps, and a lot of it is, what you have learned and what you have grown and how you have stretched in so many ways and taken on tasks that you never thought you might have. No longer are the same person that you are on day one of this journey. Reflecting on who you've become, the skills you've taken on, and what may have strengthened you, shows that you have a lot of great resilience and strength. Step into prioritizing your life care. We hear a lot about engaging in self-care, and that's great. But there's also this term coined called life care. But seeing as a general life care sheds the shame and the guilt. Your life matters too, just as the person living with dementia. And when taking care of yourself is saying yes to you as well. Many caregivers have shared that how their path in life matters too and is worth living. Find what life care looks like to you and start to try to engage in some of those activities.
And guideline 7 is take the time to mind yourself. As a caregiver, you may go unnoticed for all the work that you do for the person with dementia. The person with dementia may not be able to acknowledge and express appreciation for everything you do due to the damage to their brain. And others may not notice the amount of work you do, especially if they're not involved or have not walked in your shoes. I often hear from caregivers when the person with dementia has a brief 20-minute interaction with someone else, be a neighbor, a family member, a friend, that person might tell the caregiver that the person with dementia doesn't seem that bad. This can invalidate the real challenging reality caregivers are experiencing and the strain of the 24/7 care they provide. It's important that you do look after yourself by asking for help from friends, family, seeking formal help to have someone come in and stay with the person with dementia so you can take care of you. Continue with that exercise class, that Bible study group, your weekly coffee visits with a friend, your Zoom nights with a family member who lives far away. Looking after yourself is not selfish. It may feel like it, but the person you're caring for needs you at your best, and the only way to be at your best is looking after you. So, taking time to mind yourself also involves engaging in coping strategies. So, we have already talked about some of the coping strategies through the guidelines. So, we're just going to recap and discuss some and add some additional strategies. So, remember, this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. So, in the guidelines, coping strategies that we discussed were using that paradoxical thinking, the both and. I can both look after myself and look after the person with dementia, as well as engaging in support groups or peer connections.
Mhm.
And Sam's going to touch on self-care.
And there's self-care. So we have the physical about that, making sure that we regularly look at our medical appointments, our dental checkups. Are we doing that? Or are we just doing for the person living with dementia? How we try to protect our sleep and time. Are we accepting that day program? Are we looking for some support when it comes to allowing people to come in if we need to, or utilizing respite to come to a support group? Gentle movement that helps you in a daily life, being able to try things that get you out of the house, daily walks or things like that, naps if you need it, listening to your body when you're requiring, trying to eat well, looking at simple meals rather than skipping. And paying attention to that stress signal. So, what does that mean when I have a headache, tight shoulders, and responding to how we can help yourself in those moments. Looking at the psychological, naming like those mixed emotions, as we said, when we're having a tough day, are we able to say, I'm feeling really angry right now? And it makes me really sad, though, that they're acting like this because of their dementia. So, looking at that, at being able to name those emotions that are coming up for you as they come. Talking to those peers, I hear it all the time that it's so beneficial to talk to persons that are also experiencing this journey themselves, giving them that insight, supporting one another, being able to work with a counselor or social worker, if you're feeling like I need to look at how I'm grieving right now, and maybe talking to someone would really be helpful. Giving yourself permission to take those breaks are really as important as well. Also, as going along with that spiritual aspect too, that, a big part of who we are is a spiritual side, and a part maybe looking at how that looks to us, prayer, meditation, walks in nature, journaling. It doesn't have to be specific to a religion, but it could be how do we input that in our life.
Another strategy is creating a psychological family. So, your circle of support can go beyond your biological blood related family. And these are the people you naturally turn to or lean on in good times and the bad times of your life. You want to engage with those who understand what you're going through, and this can be friends, neighbors, coworkers, faith leaders, peer support groups, healthcare providers, or even family members. The importance of seeking out your psychological family is that sometimes our biological family members are not helpful at all or supportive. It may be because that they are grieving their losses and cannot be a support to you, or commonly they just don't understand nor seem to care to understand. I do often hear family members share their opinions on what should be done regarding care, yet do not actively involve themselves in providing any of this care. And lastly, obviously, helping with coping includes education on dementia, can offer a sense of empowerment to understand the progression, access to resources, which can, again, ultimately help lower stress for caregivers, and also seeking out professional support, whether that be a counselor or a therapist. One key takeaway is that retreating from social activities or activities that you enjoy has a negative effect on both you as the caregiver and the person that you're caring for. Looking after you is essential for the well-being of the both of you.
To summarize what we've talked about regarding grief and ambiguous loss, this picture is an illustration of how grief can be experienced. So in this picture, we have these jars with, which is your life. So if you were to look at the jar as our life, that's what it is. That it is the space for all the things you do, you feel, and you experience. Whereas those black balls are the grief. When a loss happens, grief is like a large ball that you put in your first jar. At first, it takes up a lot of space. It's heavy, it's hard to move around, and feels like it dominates the whole jar. So, your whole life, right? Life grows around the grief. So, as you can see in this image, it says people tend to believe that grief shrinks over time. So we have the jar, and then it's really big, then it goes to medium to small. But the reality is that we often grow around our grief. So in the second image, it says what really happens is we grow around our grief. So it doesn't mean that that grief might be changed or gone, but it means that we as a person along the journey are growing around that grief. What our relationships, our hobbies, work, laughter, accomplishments, community, those things have grown throughout our journey with the person with dementia and beyond. And so our life looks different because of that. And sometimes grief becomes a part of the arrangement. Sometimes the grief ball gets jostled, right? When we're going through this journey, we think that we're growing around this grief, but then a big part of grief comes back, a memory, a holiday, a birthday, a milestone, and then it feels big again. And then other times it just sits quietly. So this is a really great imagery to show that grief doesn't eliminate completely. Sometimes there's no sense of real closure or moving on, as sometimes society might put it to us. But it really does show that, as time goes on, as we build connections, as we open our heart to others, connection, self-care, our jar, which is our life, is growing around that grief.
So just as we wrap up, so here are some of the resources for some further information. So at the Alzheimer's Society, we do offer support groups as well as one-to-one client support. And we offer a 6-week living with ambiguous loss group, which does cover what we talked about today and more. And there are some few additional resources as well as including that Pauline Boss book that we referred to, the Alzheimer's Society booklet on ambiguous loss and grief and dementia, as well as there are some self-paced modules to help you understand grief on different topics, especially caring for someone with dementia, by using mygrief.ca. So we do appreciate the time today to share with all of you, and we are happy to answer any questions that you might have. And I will put our contact information in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you both so much. If anyone has any questions, you can put those in the chat. There was a comment, love the visual, makes complete sense. Thank you for that. Also, I love that visual. A question that has come up, not in the chat, but I've heard from others is, does the ambiguous loss change throughout the dementia journey? Like when is it different for the experience different for someone when they're in long-term care versus right after diagnosis? I don't know if either of you can speak to kind of the progression or the fluctuation of what that might look like.
Yeah, I definitely think it does. I think ambiguous loss is going to be with you throughout your whole journey, but what you experience in I think what's changes is those secondary losses, right? As we looked at our diagram in the beginning, is that we have dementia as our primary loss, but then as the dementia progresses and at what stage we're in, there are secondary losses that are more primal than maybe others, right? And so in the beginning, we might feel like maybe certain things or relationship rules are changing. What they once did before in the home, they're not doing it any longer. I'm taking on this role. But then maybe in later stages, it might be like I'm really starting to not feel like I am